Welcome, welcome, welcome everyone. This of course is Talent Experience Live. We are coming to you live from HR Tech out here in Las Vegas. Hence the raspy voice. The desert had sucked all of the water out of my body. So I apologize for that. But it's not going to stop me from having a great conversation today. Today we're talking all about employer branding. But before we get into that, of course, we have to pay the bills around these parts. Talent Experience Live is proudly brought to you by the good folks here at Phenom, whose purpose is to help 1 billion people find the right job. We do this through an intelligent talent experience platform. Now that the bills are paid, I'd like to welcome all my guests to talk all things employer branding. CEO of Cliquify, Amit Parmar. Amit, how are you?
Good. How are you? Super dry here.
Very dry, very dry. I drank a whole water before this happened, and I'm going to need another one. But
yeah, we're going to need to go to like a gallon of water today.
Please.
Right?
And they hide the water around here.
Yeah,
I don't
it's
understand.
like, where's the water, right?
How's the event been for you so far?
Good, man. Just amazing companies here represented, doing some amazing things, disruptive things in the talent function. So I always love coming to these events. Although we were just talking, maybe not Vegas. Next one, maybe Miami would be a good option. Right?
Absolutely.
Or Philly even, right?
Philly would be nice. Yeah, there is an event in Philly. I am Phenom. You come.
Yes, I love that.
I love it. Also, it's typically a little bit cooler.
Yeah.
Not as many pools. That's, I guess, the downside.
Yeah,
but who has
I'm
the
all
time?
right. Yeah, well, I don't
anyway?
work out anyway, so it's all good.
Exactly. So obviously every year, HR Tech, it feels like it's bigger and bigger and bigger. The booths are larger and everything. And I think an interesting aspect is it's a great networking event, right? And companies showcase their employer brands here from a booth perspective, but they're also doing it from a talent acquisition perspective, which is oftentimes when you think about employer brand. I know today we're going to dive in a little bit more about the benefits for employees, but if you could, how have you seen employer brands change over the past few years and how people are approaching it?
Yeah, look, I think one of the reasons we launched Cliquify 3 years ago was we saw this huge trends in talent, right? Like there are interesting things happening around the world as it relates to people and jobs, which is people are birthing less, so there are less newborns out there in the world, so the population is actually going to decline in terms of labor out there. Education is getting expensive by the day, as we know, right? I just had one of my neighbors, kids going to Penn State and paying like $70,000 a year. Like, it's crazy, right? So that's an issue, right? So skills will be hard to come by in terms of like the top end skills we're looking for, or companies are looking for. And then lastly, what's happening out there is immigration policies. They're getting more insular. Right, so how do you get talent around the world to actually be where they need to be to support their end clients or customers? So all of that is basically resulting in this perfect storm, is what we call it, around companies. Really, the war for talent has been on. We've known it's been on. Yes, there are ebbs and flows, right? But if you look at the macro trends, like companies that actually build their brand inside out for the long haul are the ones we believe are going to win in the marketplace.
It makes sense. I mean, I think when you think historically about the successful organizations, it was built around people spending their entire lives working for one company. People didn't job hop as it was. It was actually frowned upon. When I was a recruiter, if you saw somebody who had 2 or 3 jobs over X amount of years, it was, this person may not be safe. And it seems like companies are trying to combat that now when you talk about the limited talent outside of your 4 walls. I want to ask you from the perspective, when it comes to content, obviously, what you're facing to attract talent in, how does that affect the folks who are already within your organization when it comes to what you're portraying, what work looks like? Do they have to be transparent? How is that? Am I making sense there with that question?
Absolutely, yeah. I think more and more companies do need to start to focus on the internal talent, and they're starting to do that, right? Like, how do you retain better? It's easier said than done, right? Because you're relying on the department manager, and you get a lot of inconsistencies the larger the organization, right? In terms of the manager is the number one reason why people leave an organization, right? And so how do you actually build that capability to have those conversations between the manager and the employee about what career paths might there be available for you? the transparency factor is big, right? Like internally as well. We've heard so many times where employees are finding, things about a company on the social media feed before their internal intranet, right? And we're seeing that happen more often than not. So there's this whole area of communication strategies around how do you get people to really understand your culture is a big area that we're focused on from a Cliquify standpoint. I will say there's kind of an overarching strategy around how do you get employees excited about, maybe it's social responsibility, maybe it's diversity, right? It's not even maybe about the job that they do, but the broader value proposition, right? For lack of a better term. How do you actually communicate that in a very transparent way, not only with your internal employees, but then you want your employees to become advocates, so that there's a whole, as you know, right? Referrals are the number one source of hire in terms of quality, right? Maybe cost as well. And so how do you actually create that scalability where your employees are going to want to say, you know what, Devin, you need to come to Cliquify, right? Or Devin, hey, this is a great company, check it out, right? And I don't know if that naturally happens out there.
It's challenging. I think obviously Phenom was built on the application process, right? And I love what the career sites that we build and everything like that, but I'll tell you the best application process is none whatsoever. Sure. It's having a conversation through a referral where you get to meet, the decision maker, and then that's kind of the last step in the process. To your point, referrals, I think, are oftentimes effective because there's less red tape. You don't have to jump through things. When it comes to the transparency aspect, and you mentioned social initiatives and things like that, I think it is important to share those internally, whether that be an all hands or something like that, but multiple times. And I don't think that happens anymore. As we look at the way the world changed in 2020 through 2023, we all went home. Worked out for some, didn't work out for others, whatever the case may be. But we all found our different ways to communicate. I don't rely on email nearly as much as I used to. I text folks, right? I texted you today.
Yeah, absolutely. And we love that. There's a human element to the interconnectivity using tech, right?
Yes.
And we're going to touch on the trust factor a bit here, right? So Edelman, right, who I love, I follow Edelman, and every year they release the Trust Barometer, right? So Trust Barometer, it's a research study that Edelman does every year. They just launched it, I think, a month or so ago. Every year they do this, and if you look at the trust in institutions from people, it's on a steady decline over the last 20 years, right? Again, macro trends, the trend is your friend, right? So when you start to look at that and you say, okay, well, if I have my CEO up there talking, how much do employees believe that? Or even candidates believe that, for that matter, right? So to your point, you got to have straight up non-corporate jargon connectivity that you want to build with your employee base.
And I think you mentioned managers there for a second. I want to jump back to that. Managing is one of two jobs, technically, where if you have been managed, you're expected to be able to be managed, right? The other one's parenting. If you've been parented, now there's no real training, right? You can take classes and things like that. But to your point, the career pathing and that aspect of it, they're challenging conversations.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think when it comes to employer branding, you have to show that those conversations are okay internally, that you may not be happy in your current role. You love the company, you love what they stand for, the CEO is talking the talk to your perspective, but to go to your boss and say, hey, I kind of want to go in a different direction, everyone, it's human nature, kind of raises red flags, but that trust factor and building that relationship is challenging. How do you think organizations can do it effectively?
I think the big thing, and spot on, right, Devin? I think the big mind shift, and a lot of companies actually do this pretty well as well. So I don't want to paint a negative picture, right? A lot of companies do this really well, where they're actually changing the mindset of the leader, right, or the manager. Actually, there's distinction between the two, which we'll get into. Right? But the leader needs to understand that the talent is not theirs; it's the company's. Right? And it's a small statement, but a big, it has big implications of how leaders and managers behave with their employees,
Yep.
right? And it's a mind shift. So, Devin, if you were to work for Cliquify, which we'd love to have you, right? If you were to come over to Cliquify,
Yeah.
right? And sorry, Mahi, I'm not stealing your employees, right? Just so you know.
It's networking.
Right. But if you were to come to Cliquify, right?
Yeah.
Like we would want to have that dialogue,
Yeah.
right? And say, hey, what is it about Cliquify that number one attracted you, right? And hopefully it's a referral,
Yeah.
right? And number two, what do you have? Like I actually think the career pathing discussion needs to happen actually at onboarding. Right?
Yeah,
Like,
that's
hey,
fair.
let's talk about, hey, you're doing this, you were hired for this job today, but where do you see yourself?
Yeah.
Right? And hopefully that's a conversation that's happening during the interview process as well.
Absolutely.
Right? And I'm not sure that actually happens as much as we would like, right? So
It's fair. I mean, the interview question is, where do you see yourself in 5 years? It's an interview. Everyone's nervous, right? You're going to tell the person what they want to hear.
yeah.
To your point, onboarding process, the nerves have been calmed a little bit, right? Person has the job. They're not going to speak. And I think you can start having those conversations where it's, hey, you're in an entry-level role or you're in a senior-level role. This is the path that other folks have taken.
Right.
Is that something that interests you, right? Because the world's changing. Jobs aren't the same. We had a conversation before we started rolling. The job titles are changing, right? We're moving towards skills and things like that. But I want to get back to, you raised the question of a difference between a manager and a leader.
Right.
That's a little thought-provoking. I want to hear your thoughts.
Look, there's all kinds of discussion on this, right? Like managers are more transactional.
Yeah.
Like that's kind of the way I view it, from my personal point of view. Leaders lead with strategy, vision, long-term, like basically creating succession strategies for their entire team, right? That's a true leader, and that's a role model leader, right? In our terms, we call it that. The term manager has kind of this transactional nature to it just by the virtue of the title.
Yeah.
Right? You're basically just managing. You're getting by the day. You're managing people, right? And people are not viewed as assets by a manager, whereas I believe, people are really viewed as company assets by the leader.
Yeah. That makes total sense. You mentioned before that the talent belongs to the organization. And when you put manager there, you think, oh, I don't want to let my A+ player leave the team, right? Because then how am I going to succession plan, backfill that role? And I think also human nature be a little bit selfish, right, in that sense. But for the greater good of the organization, if that person can grow, become an advocate and say, hey, I was able to add this skill set, I was able to go to Las Vegas and have this conversation with this client or whatever it may be, it helps the organization as a whole, and it creates that path. I mean, I don't think the linear job path is even a thing anymore where... linear job path, you talked about this, right, where people had careers for 30, 20 years in organizations, and that still exists. Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that, right? It's just it's a different mindset that companies have. Shoot, I mean, if you think about it myself, right? My previous company, I was there for a long time, and I loved every bit of it, right? But I had like 8 careers in my span there. Yeah. And they were all different jobs. And I will say, right, look, technology is a great enabler. We're a tech company. Yeah. We're an enabler. It does, the ownership has to be at the employee level to take that initiative with all the tools that are provided to them, right? And say, hey, look, hey, Devin, we've invested in this great platform called Phenom, or hey, Cliquify, right? Yeah. You want to be able to own your journey, have that conversation with your leader. Hopefully you have a leader who you have an open relationship with, right? Yeah. And you've built that. It goes 2 ways, right? Once you have that, the employee actually has to take actions to say, you know what, I see this opportunity there. Hey, manager or leader, right? Yeah. I want to have this, I'm really interested in this next gig because here is how I'm going to build my career, right? It may not even be a compensation discussion, right? It has nothing to do with pay even. It's how do you want to build the skill sets that drive you, Devin, as a person? And that has to be driven by you, Devin, right? Corporations can invest all kinds of money in all these shiny gadgets that are available, right, to the public or to organizations. It's really up to the employee to take that ownership and say, hey, look, I want to map out my plan
Yep.
for the next year. Forget 5 years, because the world is so volatile, right? You'll be lucky if an employee stays with you for more than 3 years.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So-
It's true. It's I saw something on Twitter or X, excuse me, the other day, and it was I don't know if this person's going to be at our company for 2 to 3 years. They're going to retire in 5. You'd be happy to keep a person for 2 to 3 years now at this point, and if you can move them in your organization, that's a win for everyone. But I think the clock is starting sooner and sooner and sooner
it's day
for
one.
organizations. Yeah,
It's
to your
day
point.
one. You think about productivity that you can gain from an individual that you bring into their organization.
Yeah.
You want that. I even say day zero.
Yeah.
Right,
It's true.
And that's a conversation you need to start having sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
Which is, hey, Devin, thanks for joining. Like, hey, you're going to have this gig for however long you want, right?
Yep.
As long as you're performing in the way that, the company holds you accountable to perform.
Yep.
Hey, the sky's the limit within Phenom or Cliquify for
Yeah.
you, right? And that's a conversation that leaders need to be having more often.
Yeah, no, at day zero's 100% right, because that job change, recruiters are going to hop in inboxes, right? That's what it is. And I think all of this, it ties into the broader conversation of employer brand, to your point. It's not the gradient color or the logo or whatever it may be, which is what we often think of, right? The email campaigns that you send out to get talent. It's how you're leading the talent in your organization that has a lasting effect. If somebody has a bad experience at your company, we know that spreads like wildfire, right?
Yeah.
And it's tough to shake those. That's why businesses like Glassdoor exist. Yes, they're burn books. Take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
But it, the way that you have those conversations early, from day one on, I love that onboarding conversation.
And even like during the hiring process, right? Like, how many videos of the hiring manager, or even just content?
Yep.
Maybe even just like a blog.
Yeah.
Or like a short snippet, even on social. Like, hey, this is the type of leader I am, right?
Yeah.
How many of that do you see out there versus, hey, I'm hiring for this job?
Yeah.
Like you see, you go to your LinkedIn feed today, you're gonna see all these leaders saying, I'm hiring a senior project manager. Really?
Yeah.
Like, no, that's not going to get you quality talent.
Yeah.
Right? Instead, it should be, hey, this is the type of leader I am. I like to lead by example. Here is how I think about talent. Oh, by the way, I have an amazing opportunity for somebody to lead project management within my organization. Would love to talk to you.
Yeah. I would even say maybe take it a step further than that. Talk about what you enjoy.
That's right.
There's countless blogs, newspaper articles about you spend more time with your coworkers than your own family, right? I'm not going to go work for somebody that's a Patriots fan. How
about an Eagles fan?
That's fine. Yeah, that is okay. That is okay. But I obviously we kid about football, but what you enjoy movie-wise, because you're going to have conversation. I think that's what creates a good company culture, is being able to have conversations about what's going on in the world, what you did over the weekend, where it's not transactional or managing people to that extent.
Oh yeah, that's a big difference. Yeah, great point, Devin. Right, so there's a big difference between that transactional, like, hey, let's get on a one-on-one meeting. Okay, what are we accomplishing this week?
Yep.
Versus that one-on-one meeting that you have, maybe it's monthly, weekly, depending on the frequency that you have as a leader. The conversation is about, hey, how's your family doing?
Yeah.
Right? Are you enjoying what you're working on? How can I help you?
Yeah.
Right? Like, these are 3 simple questions that I just asked you. Totally different conversation, the level of relationship that you're building with your employees.
No, and we sort of started to have this conversation during the pandemic, right? There was a lot of talk around mental health, things like that, and I think now we're getting back into, return to the office, that sort of workflow, and those conversations aren't happening as much, which ties back into employer branding of organizations walking the walk and sticking to the promises that they made at one point. But I mean, all of this has a lasting impact. And to your point, technology is great. Cliquify is great. Phenom is great. But it's about showing that path and showing that future for folks that's really going to have an impact on your employer brand.
Yeah, and it's easier said than done, right?
Yeah.
Like, look, the larger the organization, you're trying to build a narrative.
Yep.
Totally get it. You mentioned colors and graphics. Yeah, those are table stakes, because otherwise your marketing function is going to come knocking at your door, right? So totally understand that in the enterprise environment. But it's really the inside out perspective, which I call the employee experience, right? And in fact, I've written a blog about the employee experience and how it actually shapes your employer brand externally.
Yep.
Right? Oftentimes, employer branding leaders are so focused on campaigns like, oh, I got this campaign to attract Python engineers in Budapest, right? This is all they're focused on for the next 2 months. And it's okay, but don't lose sight of the bigger picture, which is how do I build an inside-out experience that not only is going to help you retain talent that you have, but help them become advocates to attract better talent back within your organization.
Yeah. And remain authentic.
That's right. Well, that's big. That is big. I talked about the trust factor, right?
Yeah.
That is the number one. I mean, we see data on this, right? So this is not anecdotal information.
Yeah.
When you share something on your personal feed, not even the company shared content, but your own content, we're seeing 6 to 8x more engagement than company shared content these days.
What feels authentic. It doesn't feel like an ad.
That's
right. I think that's where the world is going to. And we see it with user-generated content on TikTok and stuff like that, where companies are, this is the water that I drink, or whatever it may be. But we've become so consumed with that we're being sold all the time. That, to your point, when an employee posts something from the organization, it's like, oh, that's a real person that works there. They're not just a number on a spreadsheet or something along those lines.
It's more relatable, right?
Yeah.
And we're actually starting to see the marketing function too now. I mean, I've seen ads now, right, where they're actually getting employees involved in the ads, right? So we're starting to see some of that user-generated content.
Yeah.
Still branded, but...
Yeah, of course. And it's... more and more folks are being okay in front of the camera or okay in front of these things. I think a lot of that has to do with this new crop of talent that's coming in where we have our phones and stuff like that.
And the assistants, right? Like Love GPT, right? I mean, there's a lot of talk around AI right now. So I view that as, I think you guys coined it Copilot, right? In your last Phenom event, right? Yeah. There is that barrier that we're starting to reduce for people, to figure out what content they should be posting out there to help them.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think that's great because you're going to now start to see employees become more comfortable sharing content about their company in a co-piloted way.
Yes, absolutely. With the assistant, the toughest part about writing or creating content is staring at a blank page, right?
Oh, yeah,
if you have that little bit of a kickstart,
I call it the spark.
The spark, that's perfect.
You need that spark to say, oh, have you thought about, hey, what are you passionate about?
Yeah.
Right. What do you like about working here?
Yeah.
Right. Like very simple questions that I'm sure GPT can come up with, right? They will actually invoke a very positive, realistic response from the employees.
Yeah. No, this is it's a fun conversation. I could talk to you all day.
I know, man. We need to. We need to hit up a bar later.
We do.
With some water.
Yes, please. Lots and lots of water. Before I let you go, anything we missed on? Anything that you wanted to hit home for the audience?
Yeah, no.
Today?
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you as always. I love it. I hope we can do more of these.
Yeah. No more in Vegas, though. We're done with Vegas.
Yeah, I think Philly would be nice.
Yes,
right?
we'll do
New
it
York.
again. Yes.
We need to bring this back to the East Coast. I'm tired of all the San Francisco, venture capital money that's flowing there. No, all jokes aside, would love to continue the conversation. And thank you to the audience for listening in.
Of course, thank you for joining me. I know you got a busy day. If you're at HR Tech, stop by Amit's booth for
2413.
2413, or you can always visit the website. Reach out to you on LinkedIn as well.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, cool, man. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks.
See you soon.